Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation where two normal Christians are making sense of a world in chaos. My name is Luke, and that is not Mike across from me. Today we have a special guest, David. Am I allowed to give your last name, David? I don't know, like online security-wise. I mean, facial.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This is my friend and
I don't like the internet,
colleague,
but yeah.
David Giglio. We're both active leaders in our local church. And today we're going to talk about foreign wars in presidential campaigns, Werry's Law, and why millennials still live at home. David, is this your first time being on a podcast?
Nope. I've been to one other podcast.
You've done it before?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Buddy Puckets. That's right.
I'll expect great things.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so we like to start with a question, and today will be no different. The question is, what is a leader? And I'll tell a little story to kind of intro this. So I used to teach middle school, and when you teach middle school and try to assign tasks, you learn quickly that you can't expect them to know how to do anything, especially when it comes to social skills. And so I was trying to get group work to be more effective, and I decided to give them roles, a group of four. One person's job is to keep track of time. Another person's job is to look at the quality of the work. Is it maintaining? And another person might keep records. And then I said, first, leader, one person is in charge, and immediately they just started bossing each other around, right? And it was like this power-hungry surge of tyranny. And so I had to define it as something very specific to keep that from happening. And I said, the leaders, you have no authority in that situation. Your job is not to make sure things get done. Your job is not to tell people what to do. Your job instead is to get everyone engaged in the process. And so if someone is not, you're inviting them, right? And especially like math class group work, try to make someone do that. Without authority, it doesn't work, right? Even with authority, it barely works. But that was my take on like what a leader is in that scenario. And I think most leadership is voluntary, right?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think what that reminds me of is almost this it's like the deeper level of leadership where you have, you can always, there's always like when we talk about a project, there's like the project, let's get it done, but that's a very temporary type of leadership. It's not the long lasting type, like the one that you can get to that deeper level of, man, can you get actual buy-in and bring people from apathy into passion? That I think is that gate from just getting a project or something done into becoming a leader of people.
Well, and actually, depending on the type of task, you have to lead differently, right? If it's mundane and it's repetitive,
you just got to be like, let's go, let's get it done, right? Yeah.
In fact, in those circumstances, you just say, hey, I'll give you a reward. Let's get it done fast, right?
Exactly. That's
but
right.
If it's creative at all, rewards don't work. In fact, they can sabotage what you're trying to do. But what I hear you saying is that leaders' job is to find out what motivates, what persuades, and what inspires.
That's interesting because I think about that. Like this might be as like it's just like a case in point. I think about what motivates somebody. Question has to do is like, okay, we're having like a youth group event, right? And how do you get people to invite people in? Yeah. And like one thing I'd done in the past, and I've always kind of been on the fence about, is like, well, should we incentivize with like a gift card, right? Like that you can be, entered into a gift card
the
thing.
Classic youth group pizza party.
That's right. Yeah. And you're like, what is that question of like, man, how do you motivate? But how do you also try to leave that space for the best motivation?
Yeah.
So
there's two things that come to mind with that. One is a study about math students where they were looking at what kind of praise to give them. These were fifth graders in this study. And one group was praised simply by saying, you did a good job. You must be really smart. And then the other group was praised by saying, you did a good job. You must have worked hard. And what they found in the long run, in fact, not even that long, it was, a short study. And so immediately afterward, what they found is a huge influence that they didn't expect. The kids who were praised for being smart, the intrinsic praise, you can't really make yourself smarter. You can make yourself dumber chemically. Don't eat lead, kids. But no, the kids who were told they were smart started avoiding challenging work that might threaten their status as smart. And the kids who were praised for working hard pursued challenges even if failure was more of a risk. Right?
Yeah.
So there's motivation about who you are,
Yeah.
right? Your identity. And that's why our praise, what we notice, I've seen a lot of dads focusing tons of praise on their daughters for being beautiful. I think, careful. Because what you're saying to your daughter is, the most important thing about you, the thing I notice, is that you're beautiful. Now, the dads, I think, are trying to say, I want you to be confident. I don't want you to be insecure about yourself, so I'm going to focus that. I think it does the opposite. I think it self-sabotages without even realizing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Because I've heard you say that before, and I think, I've been wrestling with this question a lot with Nova. She's like, 4, and I think there's just a certain sense of which there's like this both and. So like, like working with like kids, or working with like youth, or seeing people, it's like, it does seem to be a certain correlation of where when your father doesn't give you or doesn't like affirm you, you go looking for it elsewhere, right? You go looking where it does feel like there is a certain sense in which we can work from a place of, and maybe this is where maybe I disagree with like the application, although I think I agree with the heart, is to say like, God gives us a place to start where we are secure, and then we can work from that place. So like, I think it does remove that place of like, you don't need to earn, because you are beautiful in my eyes, not because your physical appearance is attractive, but because you are beautiful. And yes, God has also made you attractive in terms of not necessarily physical, but like God made you just the way you are, really pointing it back to.
And there's a lot of Christian thought. I remember thinking this way as a young man, of like, oh, in its purest form, we wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even see that girls are beautiful. It's like, give me a break.
No, exactly. And there is a certain sense of which is just true, and I don't want to like be so like anti, like I don't want to wage a war on beauty, if that makes sense. Because I think beauty is one of those 3 pillars. I mean, like believing that beauty is a thing. And that it matters.
Yeah, we're going to talk about architecture.
Is important, and so, but I have been wrestling with this because, man, I'll notice how do we have these conversations, and what is discipling her with like Disney movies, all that kind of stuff, where it really seems, very, and I'm noticing this, is just, okay, this beauty is becoming important, and maybe
so
many
too
of the
important. Disney movies are literally like, Dad is a doofus, I'm gonna go get my attention and my love from a man, right? Exactly. And even if he's a beast.
Right. And so I don't want to just like deny and like retreat, right? But how do I have conversations and engage with that context? Because also there's a certain sense of which like she's a girl, and I also I want to encourage the differences between girls and guys at times. And she's going to be interested in things that are like,
and I'm not trying to say that beauty isn't important, but rather that it's not what gives you value, right? There's a moral quality to beauty that can be misused.
Right.
And so what I want to notice about like my sons, right? Because I have 3 teenagers, is what have they put their hand to learn, to build? What skill have they acquired, right? And where and that, because from overcoming obstacles, confidence is born. Yeah. And so we can try to destroy insecurity with self-esteem, which is empty praise and pretending that weaknesses and failures don't happen. But in fact, real confidence, which isn't self-esteem by its own wording, because you're not esteeming yourself, you're just realizing, hey, I can accomplish things if I set my mind to it. Maybe I could accomplish something great. Let's go try. Right? Instead of that super focus on your own failures and weaknesses.
And I think there's a certain sense in which there's both. It's like the both and. Like I've heard this phrase where it's like, God is easy to please, hard to satisfy. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. There's a certain sense in which God is very like, there's not a earn, right? It's like this place of, we don't earn God's affection, right? We don't earn God's favor. But we can make him proud, right? Almost. We can be like, there's a certain sense in which I I desire more than just like the love that he gives freely. I also want his, like, he looks at my life and says, man, I love that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what, like, I think the difference is of saying, like, there's this sense in which we can say, man, I appreciate and love our kids in who they are in terms of who God's made them to be, but also not giving us necessarily credit for it because it's not necessarily anything that they've done. It's just,
and how much of pride comes from things that God gave you. Right.
Exactly. I heard this sermon yesterday. It was like, man, when you're really struggling with pride, you start to like brag about stuff you had nothing to do with. Like, he's like, this guy's from Brooklyn. He's like, and I just go around saying, man, yeah, who's in Brooklyn? Who's from Brooklyn in here? And everyone's like, he's like, but I had nothing to do with the fact that I was born in Brooklyn, and I have nothing to do with any of my gifts, really.
Well,
like,
those are the things, it's not the kid who worked hard to overcome that has the worst pride.
Yeah.
It's the kid who didn't have to work hard.
That's right.
Who really thinks he's better, right?
Which is probably why I struggle so much with pride, right?
That's right. But it's the kid whose parents have the money that he thinks is better. You know what I'm saying? It's always
so
external.
True. It's always the people that, it's what they say, it's like the people who get A's, but didn't have to work very hard for the A's.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah. One more thing on leadership, and then I want to move on, and that is the secondary. So if the primary role of a leader is to get everybody in the game, right, to meet their potential, then secondarily, the leader's job is to make sure nobody's undermining that. So there's always, as a leader, there's always these outside influences. There's wrong priorities. There's ideas that we shouldn't be pursuing. And as a leader, you're sifting those things so that you can focus on what really matters. Yeah. And
that's so good. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Protect the mission, I think, is what I would say.
More and more, it's like I was reading this. I think it's Galatians where he says, like, if I was planning to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. And that is just like, oh man. So I agree with that entirely. I think the last thing, I mean, I don't know if you're going to talk about this too, but like, I think that connects to that is also ultimately setting, like, what's the aim? Like,
that's right. Yeah.
What is the aim? Like, where are we going? Like, what's
common mission?
What's the mission?
And I think people who are very mission focused, right? People who are very ambitious or successful in whatever they're pursuing, it's why they struggle at home because family feels aimless. Like, we're just babysitting until they grow up. What is the point of this? And so we've tried to resist that, my wife and I, by setting specific aims, not just like, hey, we want to talk about this character trait of patience with your brother, and that's training, but rather what's the mission? What are we doing? And setting short-term and long-term goals of like, let's set a goal to build this thing to let's save money as a group, as a team, not just like, mom and dad pay for it, which is really dad pay for it, right? But rather we're all going to work together to build something, to make something. That's so good. Especially as teenagers.
No, and I think that's something that I'm starting to do, but honestly, even as you just talk about it like that, I think that adds a lot, even as I think about, like, because you want to take that mission, especially as I think fathers, like, where you're out, pursuing stuff, like, to then go home and be like, all right, where are we going here? With the kids, what's my goal, and how do I set that goal, and even have those expectations for myself of like, how are we, meeting that, especially as I think, because I have that exact same thing where it can feel just a little undefined.
It reminds me of a book, but I can't think of the name of it, but I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. It's a book about setting a mission for your family that I read, very short book. And what they recommended, the author, was to set 3 priorities of value as a family that you want to express that make your family unique, right? So distinctives. And say, then every opportunity that comes up has to be sifted through those distinctives. And if they don't match with your priorities, then you don't do them.
It's so good.
And that's how you avoid the constant yes trap of, well, school wants me to volunteer and church wants me to organize this thing. And, every kid's got to practice and you're just chasing your tail for years, driving around town in a minivan.
I think it also allows that space to be able to then, I think as a father and as a couple, to be able to then just have agreed upon, hey, this is what's important.
Yeah.
And then we can start to then have this almost unbiased, say, no, this is what we do. This is what we prioritize.
Yeah.
And this, even though it might be a good thing, isn't in alignment with where God's calling us. Yeah. That's
so
really
what we
good.
did, my wife and I, we sat down and had this conversation, and we went back to the beginning of like, what is it that attracted me to her? And what about me attracted was attractive to her, right? Like, why did we marry? And so it was like, well, what did we both want out of life? And now let's set that and give it to our sons. So for us, it was family, or rather hospitality, that our home is a place, right? God's given us this incredible home. So hospitality in our home. And to this day, we have 2-3 times a week people over for different functions and activities. And then adventure. We're going to go do things other people don't do. We're going to have fun in ways that are a little dangerous, right? That require a risk. And then teaching the gospel. So we're finding opportunities to share the gospel and to teach it. And
I feel like if you were to like really, and I feel like what's crazy is like, and your ability to be able to then look and ask people, hey, is this how it lives out?
right.
It's like, I think that is the story that your life tells. Is like anyone who like looks at you guys would be like, oh yeah, I love being in their home. Right. I love doing crazy stuff, or going skiing and snowboarding with them every weekend,
right.
or and I think that also bleeds in, and the gospel component too also bleeds into being able to start things like Trinity School and things like that, where you're willing to take those adventurous, like follow God into the unknown, you know?
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, we're going to move on. If you're enjoying this conversation, click subscribe so you'll get the next episode sent to you automatically, or, maybe it's follow. We're on a bunch of platforms, but what we really want is actually to leave us a comment on YouTube. Tell us why we're wrong about something, because that's what we love. And leave us a review on the podcast platform of choice. Yeah. And share it with a friend. All right.
those more we can get those, you guys can get those reviews. That's really what starts to pump, bring you up on those search search results and all that stuff. So the reviews is key.
We're going to pump the reviews. Leave us a 5-star review. If you're only 4 stars, just exaggerate a little. It's not a lie. It's okay. Yeah. All right.
Maybe just don't leave a review. If you're at a 4-star and
you're at 4,
you can't. Yeah.
Listen to a couple more episodes until
right.
you can get to a 5.
That's right.
There you go. All right. Let's talk about incumbents. I had this thought because I was bracing myself for the COVID of this go around of I'm talking presidential elections, right? 4 years ago. Look at it. I'm doing Trump hands right now. I'm not even meaning to.
I know.
He always does this thing. Okay. Anyway. 4 years ago, we're at the time now where COVID kicked off as a way to undermine. I mean, we can get conspiracies deep, but it did functionally undermine Trump's reelection. And so I thought this year, oh man, what's the crazy going to be?
There was also George Floyd that happened.
The George Floyd
right
riots.
Around there too. I mean, there was a ton 2020.
There were so many things. Yeah, it was definitely a multi-pronged attack. It dawned on me, though, that incumbents don't want chaos locally because that means they're not doing a great job. So my prediction for this year is there will not be domestic chaos. There will be foreign chaos. Now, if there is domestic chaos, it would be such that Biden doesn't, it's not his doing. It's not the Democrat, leftist, deep state conspiracy, whatever, we're going with these days. That doesn't mean chickens don't just come home to roost in the housing market or the stock market or other things. But incumbents' motivation is always to make things peaceful at home so that he can get reelected. And foreign wars, make presidential numbers go up. Isn't that Wag the Dog movie? Let's start a war overseas so we can win the reelection. Any thoughts on that? What do you?
I'd be interested in seeing what history would say to that. Like, if you almost looked at different election cycles, what was 2012? I'm trying to think about what 2012 was like. It doesn't feel like there was a lot of internal crazy stuff that was happening in 2012 at that election.
Well, 2008 is what struck me.
Yeah,
because right before Bush is trying to hand the reins over to McCain, the
everything
whole
collapses.
Banking system collapses.
Yeah,
and it's oh, McCain's done. There's no way he can get in.
Yeah,
and people tried to blame Chris Christie for hugging Obama after Hurricane Sandy. I was like, no. There's a giant housing collapse.
No.
The entire economy under Bush's watch has, it was silly to me, but
it was awful.
Yeah. 2012, you'd want stability to get Obama reelected, right? But then you'd want some kind of foreign war. When was Libya and all that nonsense?
Oh, that was around 2012.
Yeah.
That was all 2012. But that didn't. I feel like that was the biggest hurt for Obama's.
Think of Bush. It ended up being
like
right?
with Benghazi and all that stuff, and.
But what he was doing is kicking up dust in the Middle East, and that was just
true.
one of the side effects.
That came out of the Arab Spring, right? That was all connected with the Arab Spring.
Which Obama was a big part of that, right?
Yeah.
And empowering Iran in the Middle East over Saudi Arabia, which Bush tended to back. What was Bush's let's get reelected was the Iraq War.
The Iraq War was
2003. He goes in to get elected in 2004.
And he was, I mean, and I think historically there's so much precedent for that in terms of like, it does do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about even just, FDR. I mean, how many, he could have won re-election for the rest of his life as long as they were in World War II.
As long as keep that going.
Like it was, and everywhere, I feel like that was, even with Vietnam, you'd have a certain sense of which it was the incumbent who would be for that war, and then whoever would be trying to get them out of it. I do think that this year it's not going to work as well. Like, I don't think that it's, I don't think it's going to work as well, because I don't think that these wars are very, like, they don't have a big heart tie. Like, no one's like,
Ukraine.
Like when 9/11 happened, it was like, that was, like, I mean, Bush's approval ratings are like in the 80s. Like,
but Israel had their 9/11, right, and that feels like something that Biden is deep into.
He's getting into it, but then there's this weird division on the left about it.
Well, division on the right too,
because
Israel has got their hands in both sides. They're trying to play both sides of our political game as we do everywhere else.
Right. Well, you also have this sense in which it's weird because you have these non-interventionists. Mm-hmm. Who are now like, all right, we need to be non-interventionist in everything. And so there's this both and of like, and then you almost have even the like moderate Democrats who are like, oh, now look at those crazy Republicans who don't even want to get involved in Israel. And then you have the Republicans who are like not non-interventionists who are pro-Israel being like,
and then
that's weird.
And then you got a bunch of anti-Semites on both sides.
Yeah.
Which is weird too.
It is so weird.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, I think it was Michigan. Do you see that? You see the results in Michigan? Like all the people who voted like, no, they didn't vote for either candidate for Biden for his primary. You had like, it was hundreds of thousands of like Muslim Democrats who just refused to vote. There's actually a designation on there. I forget what it's called, but it's basically like a none of the above option, where it's basically we're not,
or just leave it blank.
We're no longer supporting.
Right? Because he's backed Israel so openly. Yeah, I would back Israel, but I don't think we need to be spending the billions that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm for backing Israel. I
would predict that there will be nothing left of Gaza in the end. That's my prediction. And it doesn't break my heart, to be honest. I want kids to be protected, but I mean, this is a big can of worms. But it seems really clear Hamas has put their own kids in the line of fire.
Yeah.
And continue to do so. And I mean, we're not much better. I mean, if you want to defend America and not Israel, what did we do after 9/11? We destroyed a couple countries, at least, and then and it reverberates and echoes to this day.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about incumbents. No, I'm sorry, not incumbents, localism. So I posted this. I want to read it to you. It says, the farther away from you, the entity, and I'm talking government here.
Oh, sorry, 1 second, real quick.
Oh, you got
what do you think? So, because I think we talked more on the foreign wars. So, what does that look like from contenders want chaos at home when it's like a Republican running against a Democrat? Have we ever like seen that where it just feels like, because it feels like all the like,
because that might be a line Republicans haven't crossed yet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think not necessarily. I just don't know if they have the levers of power or the levers of institutional like organization to have chaos.
But the Republicans are ginning up fear of chaos at home with the border.
Yes.
But the border, it is a real crisis. It is chaos. The numbers coming in are off the charts.
Yes.
All of that's Biden's doing.
Yeah.
But it's in the Republicans' best interest to really focus on it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Trump didn't shut down the border. There's no wall. Yeah, he didn't build it. But that suddenly got forgotten.
I think he was the guy
when he was trying to get
I think elected. It was during the re-election, during this cycle, he's like, and all you people who voted for me believed I was going to build the wall.
Nobody really thought that. There's no legal mechanism.
No.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's a way to
looking over at DeSantis thinking, man, he would have done it. He would have done it.
I know.
Yeah.
No, because that is it. That's the border. It's the border, and the other thing that I don't feel like has been emphasized enough, that if I was on the right, and I mean I'm generally on the right, but is just like the drugs and fentanyl stuff like that. I don't know if there's a way to tell that story a little bit better, but like it's just the numbers are crazy right now.
It's 100,000 people a year right now.
Yeah.
Dying of overdose on fentanyl. And heroin.
Which is we're about 2 or 3 years ago, no one was dying. Like very few people were dying on fentanyl.
I think it was 30
like,
or 40,000 a year.
Yeah, it's just
skyrocketing.
How fast it's rising is unreal.
My understanding is there's deliberate action on the part of the Chinese government to not only send the ingredients to make fentanyl, but actually send experts to Mexico to work with the cartels on how to manufacture it themselves. It's a deliberate. So in the same way that TikTok is a psychological persuasion operation, right? To turn. I mean, the vast majority. Because I was after the October 7th Israel attack, the amount of anti-Semitism that just suddenly went off the charts.
Yeah.
Well, it came from TikTok.
Yeah.
People were being persuaded because the Chinese government puts socially, what would you say? They undermine society by persuading young people to take on evil ideas.
It was that, remember that video that was going around was Osama bin Laden's letter on TikTok?
And people are suddenly like, I think I'm on Osama bin Laden's side, right? Yeah.
It's crazy how... But all of these seeds have been planted. I mean, all of these seeds have been planted for the last 20 years.
Among high school students today,
yeah,
30% of them claim to be queer on some level, sexually deviant, right? That doesn't just happen by accident. No. And it certainly isn't born this way. No. I think that myth can be sunk, right?
Yeah.
They're being persuaded and brainwashed, really, by social media, and it's deliberate. Because the Chinese version of TikTok doesn't contain those things. It's patriotic and masculine and traditional minded. It's all the things that we care about because that's what builds up a country to be strong. And the point of what they're doing is to undermine. Right? All right, let's talk about localism because and here's why. And I want to connect these two. Localism is the only realistic solution for people like us who God has not put into positions of power to say, well, what difference can we make?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a massive demoralization problem in America, especially among Christians. They're demoralized in the sense their morale is in the gutter, and they just feel like, what can you do? Right? I guess we just go to church and hope for Jesus to come back. Right? We're waiting for the rapture. So localism is to say, you know what? We can make a difference in our local school board. We can make a difference on city council. We can go to the library. Input meetings and all the things where this stuff happens and affects us. All right, so let me get to this post. It says, the farther away from you, the government entity, the less taxes you should pay it. I would rather pay taxes to fund a local pool than a Portland train. I'd rather fund an Oregon bridge than one in Alaska. Taxes are not charity. Invest in your community. So the vast majority of the taxes we pay are federal. I think that's clear, right? And it's not just going toward, Medicare and all those things and some future federally funded retirement Ponzi scheme, but actually taxes. The biggest thing that people, I think, let's say this, if you combine the federal budgets of defense, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, it's something like 96% of the whole budget is just those things. So we get on about discretionary spending and decreasing this and that money, but it's really this machine we've built of charity that we think the government should be providing.
Yeah.
And the Christian teaching of charity, I would say, has been weaponized by the government bureaucracies to increase their salaries and their institutions.
This is something I have really thought a lot about in terms of localism, and then I would also say like integralism. So like this would be more like the Catholic idea. I mean, this all like touches on like Christian nationalism. Basically, like what is the best approach to Christians' influence in like society, right? And in the world.
Right.
And I do think you need both. So like, I, for example, am not as angry at like the idea of a Christian nation, or like, let's say Ireland when they passed it initially. So like they were more Christian probably about 20, 30 years ago than they are today.
I mean, yeah, everyone was.
Yeah. Like when they passed a socialized medicine, right? You're talking about a pretty homogenous country, pretty shared values. Yeah. And they're like, okay, we're going to do this together. It's a more local, right? More local setting. And there's a certain sense in which I think Christian virtue and Christian charity, like, should live itself out in some practice on policy in terms of, even when it comes to like economic policy for all your society. And there has to be some sort of balance between the local and the federal. I 100% believe like the ultimate solution is localism, is because it's a heart issue. And I think this is in some ways the difference between maybe a more Catholic and an evangelical approach, is because I do think there's like a sense in which you have to go change your character of your place to be able to then bring change. What are you saying? You're thinking?
Well, I'm trying to connect the Catholic to the evangelical.
Do you want me to I'll
Is it because Catholics prioritize?
I can kind of give a broad brushstrokes of basically the two approaches. So
okay, yeah, do it.
One is like, so integralism is basically, they call it their post-liberals is the idea. So the post-liberal order. This is writers like Patrick Deneen. There's a lot of kind of Catholic writers, and who are also kind of like, we might categorize them as Christian nationalists. I'm guessing that they would honestly like probably agree with a lot of what Christian nationalisms would write about.
Right. Yeah.
But they argue for a much stronger federal government. And their whole argument is simply, and this is hard to argue with a little bit, is they have a certain sense in which basically their argument is that we're too far gone. And so you basically, every time the levers of power are given to the Democrats or given to the left, they're always willing to use them. Yeah. They're always willing to be like, we're going to push as far as we go. And then you have kind of the conservatives who get in there who are like, well, we're just kind of for like shrinking the size of government, right? And they don't really do that anyway, right? Because nobody really does
Deficits don't go down under Republicans, ever.
And so his whole argument is that the country won't be saved by industrious bands of hobbits, right? Like that's his whole argument. And so you need the use of power, godly use of power. And so he would point to someone like DeSantis, and I would argue that DeSantis has illustrated how to do this better than almost anyone else, because he was not afraid of power. Like he wasn't afraid of like
what DeSantis did well, I think, is, instead of going out and asking permission from a fickle populace of, what do you think if I did this or that? He just does it.
Yes.
Then the people see that it works and say, oh, we like it. And he gets reelected by 20%.
Right.
Right. Whereas someone like Greg Abbott is going to talk about doing something for months, like protect the border. In the end, he's going to back down. And then everybody's frustrated that he didn't really do anything he promised. And that's kind of what Trump did with the border, too. I mean, he made gains for sure.
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting is Catholics are more hierarchical in their church structure. Yeah. And so you could see that they would be more comfortable with exerting authority on the scale of libertarian to totalitarian. Right? Or what's the scale? Libertarian to authoritarian? Yeah. Catholics rank higher.
I do agree that there is some corrective measures that do have to happen at like a federal level, that there has to be a DeSantis-like character or somebody who is able to smash elements of that power, and then to be able to then go back to more of a local situation.
Well, and I want, I mean, we can always hope that Caesar will give back power to the Senate,
right?
Yeah, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what.
Or is your best hope a Constantine, right? Like, is your best hope someone who's like, you get in there and it's like, I'm going to exercise the power,
and if empires historically move west, it might be China's turn, honestly.
Right.
And there's a lot of Christianity influencing China now behind the scenes and growing. I used to say as a teacher that, and I would use my hands like this, I would say, hey kids, if the chaos goes up, then the rules go up.
Right.
Right? I have to take control because my job as the leader is to protect the mission.
Well, and that's and really, this is I think why America is such an evangelical country historically. It's such a Protestant country historically.
Yeah.
And there's bad sides to it, but there's a good side to it. And one of the good sides is the strength of institutions that are local and like community based. That it was people going to church, people like caring for each other. But now what's interesting is like there's a lot of change that has to happen to make that possible.
Well,
because
that
your
is the
average like
individualism,
it's
saying this is my town.
It is. It's the
Versus
individual.
Like, it's the king. What
I
are we
would
gonna
say
do?
it's communitarianism. Actually, I would say it's basically saying like, no, this is our town. This is what matters for all of us. The issue now is that conservatism has become so individualistic that to even go to a conservative in a town and be like, hey, we should spend some money on a road or we should spend some money on this thing. Now it's because all their money is being taken by the federal government, which it shouldn't be, right?
Right.
But you don't have any money to actually use your taxes for your own town and for the people in your own community.
No, that's definitely true. We're both on city councils and we see that struggle. And I think I don't want to pay taxes to fund who knows what on some, union-backed, who's skimming off the top road project in Mississippi. I want to build my local town and pinch every penny to get the best outcome because it's our money and it's our town.
Localism, I think, is just the idea that you can affect what's around you, right? It's just this idea of like, we need to build institutions at a local level. And if you don't have institutions at a local level, if you don't have a communitarian approach at a local level, you're always going to get eaten. And so that's the only reason why the only way localism works in the long term is when you start to say we are going to band together as a community and we're going to start to stand together as a community and we're going to start to put teeth in what our demands are. It's kind of the idea of like conservatives have historically always been against unions. Like you brought up unions just really quickly in passing. So to me, I love unions. I just think we don't know how to use unions and we have abandoned a lot of great institutions that could have been used for our power. Like if you think about during COVID, if you had a conservative union during COVID, any conservative union.
So you don't mean a union in the sense of labor, but a union in the sense of
I am talking about labor, but yeah.
Well, but when I say labor, I mean like the Labor Party, like the communist, socialism.
Yeah. No, I don't mean that.
You can have a union of concerned citizens.
Right, but so there was this thing going around called the Oregon's Moms Union, for example, right? Now they didn't really operate like a union. If like my idea for something that would be like, no, you should operate like a union, as in you should call a strike, right? And all the kids should pull out of the school at the same time,
right?
Until you get your demands met, right? But the problem is we have become so individualistic, the conservatives. That were a lot easier to pick off.
Okay, so this is exactly what I've been thinking of. And on that scale, from libertarian to authoritarian, right? The way I think of it is not what kind of government do I want, right? So if you're you can tell you're authoritarian, good listener, when you see a problem in the world and you say, there should be a law. The more you do that, the more you are willing to have a tyrant in charge who agrees with your thinking, right?
That's good.
And so on the authoritarian scale, the middle it's really about what is the size of the group that you most identify with. So the individual is the smallest size, and then the family, and then the local church, the school, the town. But then it goes from there, the state. You can talk about sports teams can be big, and what team am I on, or political parties. And then at its largest is male and female, and white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, etc., right? Okay, so what the left is always trying to do is draw the groups up to the top, male and female and race. And that's authoritarian at its peak because we divide and conquer on the biggest categories we can. And what conservatives are doing, right? And I always say it's the communists versus the rednecks. It's not actually communists versus fascists.
Yeah.
Because in the end, in the back rooms, communists and fascists are friends.
No,
because they're both authoritarian.
Yeah.
They're just exchanging what they're going to tell the people as to why they're gaining all this power.
They just have different values. They just
Well,
have maybe
they have different public values.
Yeah, they have different public values.
Their real value is always power. Okay.
Yeah. One might say I'm racist. One might say I'm, egalitarian or whatever.
Right.
Or what is it? Oh, I forget. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So What we're saying is we need to fight for the middle. That it's that localist community that says when we look at someone and say, just leave me alone, let me be on my property or with my family, you say, no, that's not enough.
That's right.
Right? We resist
That's
that
right.
impulse, and we resist the authoritarian
Yes.
impulse of saying it's all about your race. It's all about men versus women, which is what our culture is dysfunctionally falling into.
I couldn't agree more. No, that's 100% true. Like we have to have the ability to look at that person who's off by themselves and say, no, you are not living up to your responsibility. Right. And this is even the old school, like conservative way of approaching. Like there's an old liberal, like old school liberal arguments for like responsibility when it comes to taxes. Right. Those are not all wrong. Some of those arguments.
Without a doubt. Correct.
Yeah, it's like some of those arguments are correct. Like you do have a social contract. You do have a responsibility to your neighbor, I think, when you live in a society.
Well, and that's where the conservative to liberal, or I call it progressive, right? I think liberal and libertarian go in the bottom.
Yeah.
That authoritarian scale. So progressive is, I look to the future, we're going to make progress, we're going to build a perfect world in the end. Right?
You're saying progressive.
A progressive versus a conservative says we look to the past. The old ways are the best ways. And what I think is every healthy community, every healthy organization has to have both.
Has to have both.
If you just have tradition, you never innovate.
You have terrible towns.
That's right. And
like it's like you absolutely need progressives in your town.
Yeah.
Every single community that doesn't have progressives doesn't have any art, doesn't have a library, like doesn't have anything fun, right? Like a park, right? Because like community space, like what are you talking about?
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
A liberal, or a progressive rather, a progressive can invest in a town.
Right.
But what I see is the authoritarian impulse of conservatives and progressives.
Yes.
So they say, well, we're going to fight over who's going to be president.
Right.
We're going to fight over gay marriage.
It's all the plan, though. Like it's all the plan.
It's the authoritarian.
The authoritarian impulse and the authoritarian plan. It's basically saying like, and both parties, like on a global, on like a national scale, both parties.
I think global is the right word.
Global scale are all invested in that because nobody wants. Like if you really think about localism at its core, there's really nothing that should be controversial about it. Like if you really think about it, it's basically the idea of like you should be able to make your own laws, have your own tax dollars. You should be able to control what your people say in that town. Like it's a pretty democratic, it's a very democratic model. It's a very ground up model, but it's also saying we're going to cede some power to government. We're going to do things together. But the main thing that pushes against that is because, in a red state, I want to control the blue cities. In a blue state, I want to control the red cities. And
red countryside.
Or the red countryside, the red towns, and the red hamlets.
So the other side of that too, though, and I'm making this connection as we talk, is that the internet pushes toward globalism.
Yes. And this is the practical problem. The practical problem is everyone thinks you're not thinking about your local. You're thinking about whatever.
Well, you're thinking we're going
to
put this video on YouTube and hope we get thousands of views.
Right.
Or even millions, right?
Right.
And then we'll become Mr. Beast or whatever.
Right.
Whoever we emulate. And so if you say, well, our podcast has 200 subscribers.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's not. But if you had a local church of 200 people who listen to you every week.
Right.
That's a decent church.
Right.
Right? And so that's the difference between local and global. But when I say the internet too, what I mean is, one, kids are obsessed with gaining fame, right? And they no longer have an ambition to be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer.
I read a stat the other day that was literally like back in like I think it was like the 40s or I think it might have even been like the 50s.
Yeah,
it's like 10% of kids had fame rated in like a top 10 of their goals,
and now it's probably
60. Now it's like 87%.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, and so the reason for that is ready access to influential media personalities, right? By ready access, I mean social media, YouTube, the internet just gives you this feeling of connection with these famous, attractive, outgoing people. And so these kids, this is what they want to pursue. No longer is it, well, I watched a movie with Tom Cruise and I got this little chunk of him for 2 hours every couple months, right? But then I spend hours a day with my teacher. And I spend hours a day I drive by the fire truck and the policeman and Now it's no. I spend hours a day with the internet people, and I see my parents maybe in passing, right? And I try to ignore my teacher and get out my phone.
It's such an effective lie of the enemy. Like it's such an effective scheme because it's not.
It's a globalizing influence which drives you toward authoritarian perspectives.
It has to.
Yeah.
And it also drives you towards complete hopelessness.
And a monoculture, global monoculture.
Global monoculture and complete hopelessness. Because what ends up happening is you buy in as a kid or you buy in as a youth. You start to believe it. You start to think, oh, I can change the world. And then you think the only thing that matters is this environment, this thing.
Yep.
And then you start to, as you get older and older, realize it was all a lie. And then there's not only that, because that's the only thing I was really ever exposed to, the only thing I really thought mattered. All the good I could have done on a local level, I could have done investing in the people around me. I don't even think about that as an option.
And that's also why...
I don't even think about that as like,
It's also why the woke kids, the most... either leftists or even the fascists, there's not that many, so it's hard to compare.
I mean, there are fascist kids, but
miserable.
They're miserable.
They're mentally ill. Their anxiety is off the charts. And there's this culture perpetuating that because you're saying everything about the world is broken, right? From climate change to society. All the wrongs in the world are based on society, not in me. I'm perfect the way I am, right? In fact, I'm a victim, and that's what makes me even more valuable.
Yeah.
And then all of your focus, all of your effort is on things you can never change.
You can never change.
You think you can change the weather? As a kid even, right? And then they take a couple kids, right? They take what's her name, Greta Thunberg, and they put her into the global spotlight so that those kids, it's like you baited the hook.
Yeah.
That this is what you need to pursue. And now they're throwing soup on Renaissance art.
It's
thinking that they're going to make a difference.
It's absolutely awful. And then the kids in the middle, the kids who don't care, they're still miserable because they don't care, but they're given other things to care about.
But that's
that they still
push.
can't. Yeah, they still
push
can't
them down
control.
To leave me alone.
Yeah.
Right? Or you push them up to take control.
Right.
And it's the middle where you could say, you know what, kid? You could have a great school.
Yeah.
Like you could really improve your school. It's yours.
Right.
It's not theirs.
It's also, I think, what Christ does when he says, like, you can go make disciples. Like, you can go do this.
Yeah.
Like, you have a mission. Like, Christ is coming with an incredibly empowering message that, like, you have the ability to, if it was one soul, right? If this was one soul that you could think about the eternal. And to be honest.
And he says, he doesn't say to you, go build my church.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't take global.
Yes.
He doesn't put global on you.
No.
Global's on me.
He says,
I will build my church.
I will build my churches. You go do this. And then the crazy thing is this, is what I've started to realize is that your ambitions, so what you're doing is smaller, where your attention is smaller, but your ambitions are larger.
Right.
Your ambitions are actually saying, no, I don't just want to see a different president. I don't want to just see climate change fixed. I want to see the kingdom of God. I want to see souls like go from death to life. I want to see there's actually, because we are made for that. That's the other thing. Like, we are made for a huge dream, right? A huge, passion to give ourselves to, where I think when the localism without that kind of becomes a little maybe bland, where you're like, okay,
it's like a little bit Mayberry.
Right. Yeah. But once you attach the eternal global significance to it
by doing this local thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. All right, let's get a little pop culture. But first, I want to say that this podcast is a ministry of the Trinity School, which we call a culture building enterprise. We target education, but more than that, influence, industry, and the arts. If you want to support this podcast, subscribe. If you want to support the Trinity School, go to gracestaten.com/Trinity School. All right, let's do a little pop culture. Dune 2, did you see it?
I did.
Okay. So there's been a debate I've been watching online. Is Paul Atreides, the main character, is he a hero or an anti-hero villain who we side with because we tell the story from his perspective? And one of the things, I remember when I realized this, it changed how movies were. I used to love movies. I was going through the list of like all the best pictures winners in the Oscars for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And the last 10, I don't think I've seen. You know, I've seen maybe 2 of the last 10. But the first 10, I saw them all. Yeah. Right? Now, they were better movies.
That's so true.
I mean, this is old man talking, but it's like Gladiator.
Oh my gosh.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah, and now it's like the
Beautiful Mind, I think, won one.
Like, that's really great. like. Okay, anyway. But
what was the one? Was it Coda won a couple years ago? And there's just
I don't even recognize
these movies I've never even heard about.
Yeah.
Everything or everything all the time.
I kind of like that one.
Is it
was total
movie?
nihilism.
Yeah.
It was the message of the movie
pretty
was,
meta, right? Pretty
it was.
Yeah, obviously.
It was a multiverse saga, but the message of it was life has no meaning, so just love each other. Which is totally antichrist. But anyway, it was cleverly made and heartwarming because there was love. But that actually feeds the same point that I'm trying to make about Dune 2, which is that all a filmmaker has to do to get you to side with a character is tell the story from their perspective, no matter how corrupt the character is. Because everyone intrinsically thinks they're doing the right thing. Even the worst criminal, most evil person, your inner lawyer has rationalized all of your behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, and where it hasn't, that's where you have inner conflict. So we watch this movie from his perspective and we say, well, what else could he have done? He had to become a tyrant, right? Which I guess we haven't gotten to that part yet. That'll be Dune 3. But
yeah, I mean, you see the seeds.
You do.
Think have you I think I've heard the story that Frank Herbert, when he wrote the book Dune, men would read the book and be like, I think I like Paul, right?
Oh, yeah.
And women would finish the book and be like, he's awful. This is terrible.
So Denis Villeneuve, is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
French names, I think I did pretty good. Canadian though, French Canadian. Anyway, what he changed the story slightly to better emphasize Paul's villainy. In the books, when he takes on the wife for political purposes while having his concubine, the concubine goes along.
Yeah.
In the movies, she rejects it.
She leaves.
But here's the thing, and I think this is totally convincing. I read this morning in prep. Is she's in the movies? She's the most miserable of all the characters. She doesn't believe in anything. She's not a true believer at all.
Yeah.
She loves him, and now is heartbroken. Whereas his lieutenants, his soldiers, who are true believers, the prophecies are coming true. You could say, well, they're being manipulated by religion. I think that's definitely part of the message. But they're actually full of life. They're trying to defend their people from terrible oppression.
But at the end, I feel like you're kind of just left with her, where you're like, I feel like she's going to be the only one halfway decent by the end of the third one.
Might be the only good one, right? That's
the only one halfway decent.
But is she like those miserable leftists? Do you know what I'm saying? She wanted to change the world, and she realized she can't.
I don't think
will
so.
Always win.
I don't think she is.
I think she's
changed
the story significantly.
See, I think there's a certain sense in which it's kind of a localist story. Like even I think about like the way it connects, but so the best way I've thought about the series is that it's like, so it's the story of Muhammad is like the way I think about it.
Okay.
And so it's like, if you think about Muhammad, or you think about even like the Lawrence of Arabia, right? That one, like that's when we can all kind of feel like, okay, guy goes in there, and very similar.
How much of our audience do you think knows who Lawrence of Arabia is?
Lawrence of Arabia is.
If you haven't seen that movie, I have proposed to watch it with my sons the other day.
Yeah.
And they couldn't even take the fact that it had an intermission and it was like 3 hours long.
It's a long movie.
Anyway, Lawrence of Arabia.
Stunning cinematography.
World War I, rather.
World War I,
British soldier who leads a band of Bedouin fighters.
Yeah.
Who are they fighting?
I think they're fighting the Ottomans.
Yeah. Okay.
They're fighting the Muslims. The other thing is that he is a outsider.
Yep.
And who comes in and then eventually throughout the movie starts believing he's pretty much the Messiah. In the movie, and you start to see, okay, there's this interesting side to him. But I think the same thing is true to some degree of Muhammad. Like, Muhammad is a character I believe is totally convinced that he is like, that he sees something. He has some sort of demonic experience or something like that. He is deceived, and he seems to be a true believer, right? And you have all of these people uniting, right? Yep. All these fractured tribes uniting, and then reclaiming their homeland, right? Reclaiming like elements where but see, it goes beyond that. It goes beyond just unity. It goes beyond just this thing. It then goes into conquest, right? And so there's this point at which, like, Paul, for example, doesn't necessarily have to, right, go and pursue this whole, like, there is probably another way, but Paul starts to become convinced, right? He sees the vision. He takes the thing.
So for those who don't know, he does the drugs
Yeah.
He sees the future.
I feel like this is very much a spoiler episode. Right?
Yeah, we should have warned him.
Spoiler alert. We're talking about
the drugs. He sees the future. In the book, my understanding is that he, what am I saying? He's taking the route with the least death.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Doctor Strange. This is the only way, right? In the movie, when I watch it, it's not clear. Is he just accepting that billions will die, and he's going to do it? Because what else is he going to do?
I think billions do die.
I think so
regardless, I think billions die.
Which means he's just accepting that this is how it has to be, and I'm going to come out of it with power rather than get stepped on.
I think you still can't help but root for him. I mean, that's the thing. Like,
so,
you watch the movie and you're still like, let's go get him.
Well, and they do portray the opponent, the villains, as utterly evil.
Utterly evil.
So it's
just
not hard to be like, those guys need to go.
What I love about the movie is that I think it reminds me of the Silmarillion almost.
Okay.
Like these, and Tolkien would talk about how he did not like. Tolkien talked about how he did not like allegory because it wasn't history.
He didn't like Dune either.
He probably didn't like Dune.
No, he really didn't.
Okay. I'm sure he hated Dune. Yeah, I'm sure he probably hated Dune.
It's the opposite of Lord of the Rings.
It is. It is.
Lord of the Rings is the
very cynical
hero, the sacrificial leader. And Dune is the other way around completely.
I mean, connecting this back to localism, it is about Lord of the Rings is about a group of industrious hobbits who save the world, right? Like that is I think Tolkien's point. Tolkien is saying like these are the little things. It's the way of humility that actually brings the way of obedience and humility and surrender and sacrifice. I mean, that's the Christian story. This is the Muslim story, though. Like, this is the jihad story, the holy war story, which is referenced throughout the movie. And what's similar to it is, like, from the outside, like, with Islam, I feel the same way with Islam, where it's like, there are things about Islam that seem beautiful on the outside, that seem like they draw you. There's a certain reverence. There's a certain, like, whole, like, devotion. There's a certain, like, I'm going to kick you out of our land type of a thing.
Yes, right.
That, like, you, like, resonate with.
There's strength.
Yep. It's, what's the guy's name?
Andrew Tate.
The guy I hate. Anyway, Andrew Tate, who, and he's like, that's the reason I'm not a Christian, right? And also Christians would make you give up your other wives. But
you're pimping and you're prostitution.
There's like, there's this sexual morality thing in Christianity.
I'm sure it's really about their moral standards so much higher.
So much higher, yeah. I just decided that Christianity's moral standard was too low. So No. But like there's things about this movie I feel the same thing with, where you're like you feel drawn to the faith of the Fremen, and you see, and especially their version of it, even though it's technically the same faith that is really screwy in all the other cultures, right? Because it's still the what are they called? The Bene Gesserits.
Yeah, Bene Gesserit.
Bene Gesserits.
Yep.
But ultimately, it's leading to this place of deception and death, and worse than where you started. And to me, even though I know Tolkien, like, it leaves Christ out of the story. This one does, for sure. There is no Christ in this story.
Right.
But it tells the story that's been repeated throughout history in a way that we can listen to, that happens again and again and again and again when Christ is absent. When someone's
that's
like...
That's the thing. I'm pondering this Palm Sunday sermon that I get to give. And it seems very political, Palm Sunday, in ways that I haven't reflected on in the past, because I've never given it much thought. Hosanna, throw those palms down. I have a Sunday school version of it in my head. Yeah.
I didn't even know what Hosanna meant until, like...
Tell me what it means.
It means pray, save us.
Praise. Yeah, it's a war cry.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, save
Revolution.
us.
Yeah, that's right. And so these people thought Jesus is coming to be crowned king. He's going to kick out the Romans finally. We're going to be tax-free.
That's right.
And Jesus accepts their praise, even when the religious leaders say, "Why are you letting them do this?" So, but he refuses to take up arms and says, "My kingdom doesn't work that way." But Christianity has this impulse; it has this temptation now, right? Christian nationalism wrestles with this of like, are we taking over, and in what way do we take over while still loving our enemies, while still suffering like Jesus, to be glorified by God the Father, right? So the crux of it to me is, and I think this is the difference between Islam and Christianity, is in Islam, you defend yourself, you fight for your people, you fight for your honor.
Yes.
And in Christianity, you let God bring you honor. You say, I will go lower.
Yeah.
I will humble myself in the sight of the Lord and let him lift me up in due time.
You have this sense, like, maybe we'll take like Dune versus Lord of the Rings, because that's a good kind of a Dune analogy. So Dune is the way of Islam, and it has religious conviction with it.
Yeah.
I remember somebody was even telling me they were visiting, they visited Istanbul and the old Hagia Sophia that's been, I think, transferred into like a mosque.
Yeah.
And they were just saying, when I walked in there, I started to understand how evil Islam was.
Whoa.
And it was because the spirit was so heavy. Like you just walked in and it was demonic. And I
saw a post by a Muslim in England. And he said, we're taking all your churches. Literally, the old stone churches that the Anglican Church has been building for 1,000 years are turning into mosques all around the country.
The Byzantines lasted for 1,400 years.
Yeah.
Like the Byzantines, to this day, I always forget. Like, I think we forget how incredible that is. Like that the second half of the Roman Empire, that half of the Roman Empire existed for 1,400 years. And preserves within it basically almost all of like what we know.
And we forget about it.
We do. We don't even talk about the Byzantines.
Rome fell, and then the West turned into, the Dark Ages, and it was like,
that's not what happened.
Western Europe was pagan and stayed pagan until it was converted to Christianity.
And it wasn't 1,400 years; it was 1,000 years, maybe 1,000 years. Sorry, so I was a little longer. But like that's a long, and preserves it through the Dark Ages. Preserves Christian history. Preserves all of this stuff.
Okay, but here's the other side of that. The Dark Ages get a bad rap.
Yeah, it's true.
The Middle Ages, as historians call it, especially in Europe, in like England and some of the Western European countries, was actually very peaceful and joyous, right?
Very localist.
But it was simple.
Yeah, localist.
It was not empire.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about is the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
And because we're an
imperial society.
We're an imperial society.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
We look down on the Middle Ages.
That's so good.
It's also because the Middle Ages are very Christian. They're very like Christian, like you read. I mean, they're not reading the Bible because they can barely read, right? And the Bible's hard to come by because there's no printing press yet. But what they're doing is living out a simple faith.
Yeah.
In a local way.
Right. And if it wasn't for some of the centralization that was happening,
they're also building what we know of as science.
Yeah.
What we know of as universities.
Yeah.
Which have now all been conquered by the pagans. But that's what brought the peace of the West that we experience now to the degree we do.
Absolutely. And so one difference I would just say, circling back to Dune and Lord of the Rings. So one of the differences, you think about Aragorn versus Paul.
Paul Atreides. Yeah.
Like Aragorn.
I keep thinking Apostle Paul when you say Paul, so I gotta clarify.
Aragorn is like he consistently chooses the way of humility, right? Consistently chooses the way of humility. Consistently defers, but has this sense at which when the moment comes and when there is no other option, like he steps in there's just a total different feel around his character than Paul.
Yeah.
Like Paul is someone who's just tormented, who's who finally gives in to his worst desires. Is basically the feel that you get in the movie, especially. I haven't read the book, but it's like he's resisting this evil because he feels there's this evil that's being warned to him, right? If you do this, this will happen. But eventually he gives into it. And he's like, nope, what matters is I will take control. I will take the power.
Okay, so it makes me think of Israel's first three kings, okay? Where Saul is the insecure king, which is sort of what Lord of the Rings portrayed Aragorn as in the movies.
A little bit.
Versus the book, right? That I'm not so sure, should I take the
sword? In the books, he does feel more...
He's confident. He knows who he is.
Yeah, he knows who he is.
Okay, so Saul hides in the tent when they go to coronate him, right?
Yeah.
He's insecure, even though he's taller and handsome and all these things. He has imposter syndrome. David has been anointed since childhood, slaying giants, right? Leading bands of rebels, wildlife, total victory, and yet he will not ascend the throne unless the tribes come together and put him there.
Yeah.
Right?
And that feels
he waits. He doesn't go to Jerusalem. He doesn't make himself king. Then you've got Solomon. Solomon steps into king, more like Paul Atreides, and says, here's your list of assassinations you need to commit immediately so that you can cement your position. Right? Which the list was handed by David in his old age, which is a little bit of a sad story. But what I saw with Paul Atreides in the movies was the jockeying, the manipulation, that accepting of saying, okay, I'm going to take this power.
By whatever means necessary.
That's right, yeah.
David's the one who's like, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed.
And
yeah.
Even when the Lord's anointed is out of the picture, he still says, I won't be the king until you make me king.
Until you make me king.
That's
Which
right.
is Aragorn. Aragorn will not.
But I think this is that's right. This
will
is the
not
Christian
accept it.
model.
Yeah.
I think if you look at Joseph in power,
Yes.
it's the same thing. If
Yes.
you look at Daniel in power, it's the same thing. Humble positions, even persecuted, and yet God puts them.
That's right.
Right?
Humble yourself, I will exalt you. And that's the wisdom of the world. That's why Christians cannot accept the wisdom of the world and just use that means and say we're doing a Christian version of it.
Yeah,
you can't ascend to power that way.
You cannot Christianize.
You cannot
the kingdom
Christian
of darkness.
No, you have
or
to
the kingdoms of the world.
Do it Jesus' way. And Jesus' way was souls first. It really was, like, as much as like it was always souls, and then it was towns, and then it was places being transformed, and then eventually it was like you can't help.
Like localism is true in what I hear what you're saying, souls, right? Town to town, and individual people being set free and healed and
Yes.
right, miraculously and taught.
Yes.
Challenged, okay? What I also see though with Jesus is a consistent refusal to glorify himself, to obtain power.
Yes.
This doesn't mean Christians shouldn't obtain power. It
Yeah.
means we shouldn't seek glory for ourselves. And there's a lot of Christian leaders, there's a temptation in every human heart to say, I want to be, I remember as a young man feeling that drive, I want to be a pastor because that will put me at the highest rung of the Christian ladder, right? And if it wasn't Christian ladder, I want to go be a corporate lawyer, right? There was a time in high school where I wanted to be a lawyer because I was going to make money, I was going to be smart, I was going to be powerful, right? This is what I want. I wanted to climb up and obtain a position of glory and influence. And we see in the New Testament, the apostles also desiring this, right? They're arguing who's going to be the number one man when Jesus becomes the king, thinking the revolution is coming. They all thought it, even after his resurrection. When are we starting this thing? Let's get the war kicked off, right? And he says, stop, it's not up to you. Like the book of Acts.
Yeah.
He's really clear that that's not what we're doing. What he says, though, is not don't try to climb the ladder. Don't try to be the best. He says, be humble. That's how you become the best. So it is a redirection.
The last will be first. He
Yes,
says the
that's
way
right.
up is the way down. It's like I heard there's the two quotes on pride. It was like, one was like, the way to hell is not downward, it's inward. Like, so it's like the road to hell is not downward, it's inward. It's the more you make yourself king. And so the more you're exalting yourself, that's actually the road to hell. And then it's like, and then the way to heaven is not upward, it's downward. It's like this idea of like, it's the lowering of ourselves. I don't know if I actually heard that second quote, but I feel like it just connects well to this first quote.
Well, in Jesus, I made that flyer for our Easter service, and I had a lot of fun putting the crown of thorns and then the crown of gold, right? And what I hear a lot of Christians not saying directly, but it feels it. I feel it. Is Jesus had the crown of thorns so we can have the crown of gold, and that's not how it works.
Yes.
Right. Jesus had the crown of thorns so that he can have the crown of gold, and you have to go through the same thing. He says you have to take your cross if you want to follow me.
That is the story of the Roman Empire. I mean, that is the story of how the church grew. It grew through death. It grew through the thorns. It grew through suffering.
Right.
And there is an embrace of suffering, but there was also this. There was never a weakness with how they confronted government powers, any power. There was always a boldness in how you spoke, a boldness in confronting Caesar as Lord, like all of those. There wasn't the compromise. There wasn't the softening of who Jesus was.
And what I hear a lot of Christians do when they long for the suffering, right? I've heard some Christians saying, hey, America's turning against God. This is great, right? Now we get to suffer. And I think, aren't you the same guy who was saying if we just say all the right, winsome things, that all the worst people will like us?
They'll like us.
Do you know what I mean? Why? How can it be the same person?
As an encouraging thought, I will say this. What I've noticed is that there is a little bit of a shift in some of these winsome circles. Yeah. I don't know if you've noticed this, but like a good shift.
Yep.
Like I've noticed a strengthening of like, no, this. I think it was even Josh Garrels. Like Josh Garrels, I noticed him kind of being a little winsome, and just some of like I'd seen some stuff, and I don't know him at all. This is literally just very secondhand.
Josh Carrolls is a musician.
Yeah, musician. Okay. And he was on a podcast the other day. He just put out a song called Watchmen. And he was just like, man, I realized that I had been trying to just, be like, have both. The world and God. And I realized, no, there's not friendship.
That's right.
There's not friendship between the world and God.
World is enmity toward God.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do think I think that's also part of what COVID did, honestly, and just these last few years and what God's been doing this last few years is that purification of, no, it's not necessarily, and not all these people are necessarily like, on the right now, but they are purifying. I think there is a increased purification towards like the way of God versus the way of the world.
This is the problem I still have and actually feel like is worse now with Trump, is that his way is always self-glorifying.
I know.
And there was a point where, and the Cyrus connection that people of my parents' generation tried to make, right? Cyrus was the king who funded the rebuilding of the temple in the Second Temple period under Nehemiah. He was a corrupt king, but he feared God on some level and really respected, I think, Daniel and his intelligence and his... Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
What Trump does, though, is he has built around him an ecosystem of self-promoters because he's the chief self-promoter. And so now the Republican Party, which felt like it was moving toward this populism, which leans toward localism, is now continuing the shift into self-promotion, which to the left, to the fearful left, feels like authoritarianism. And I see why. I think they're wrong. I think if Trump wanted to be a dictator, obviously he would have. He had every excuse under COVID. And instead, he handed the reins to Fauci. So, if anything, he's the anti-dictator.
Yeah.
But he's a self-promoter, and that's what feels like authoritarianism.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that the argument for like his, just the practical argument for him, I think it's just diminishing because I think there's still an argument, obviously, that he'd be better than Biden. Obviously, but I think that there's a certain sense in which, especially for like the long-term health and vision of a party and for a direction, he's just doing so much more damage than he's doing good right now because it's just like, I think the principles, like it doesn't matter. Like principles don't matter.
Yeah.
Your direction doesn't matter. Christ doesn't matter. What matters is Trump.
What was interesting is in the first term, everything he said he was going to fight for the most part, he did. He didn't make progress on everything. But he made all these promises, particularly to us, to evangelicals, right? Saying, I'm going to fight for abortion. I'm going to fight for the border and things that matter to you guys. And now he's throwing those all aside.
He's not making any of those promises. All he's doing now is taking the Fox News talking points and turning them into his speech.
Right. And then denigrating everyone who's against him. Or even criticizing
It's why I'm a lot more open to saying, like, I'm very open to an RFK. Not even because I necessarily agree with anything, but a little bit more like why I would be open to Trump the first time. Because I think that having a third party who actually wins has just as much advantage, like, regardless of who it is.
And it'd be 10 times more revolutionary in the sense of upending America's deep state craziness.
You would stop the two-party system. Basically you'd be able to say no. That it's
for
been
a couple of years.
It's
so
been done.
CIA could get their hands back on it and control.
Well, if he gets, but that's the other thing. Of the one thing he cares about is dismantling the CIA.
Yeah, he's motivated. That's for sure.
So you haven't lost, and he's also the one guy who miraculously won't get any protection.
Yeah.
No matter how many times he asks.
That's right.
Although I'm not sure. Do you want protection if you're Kennedy? Like, do you want the government protecting you? Like, kind of, yeah. Right. Is that real protection?
A bunch of potential assassins all around you.
Yeah, like I feel like I'd trust private security more. Like,
yeah. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the housing crisis. I had a brainstorm the other day, and I was going back to trying to understand why do I keep seeing these news articles, or I see, influencers who are young talking about how they can't make it in our society. Right. And I know my own struggles as a family trying to live off one income. And I was trying to tell the story, and I want to tell it to you and see if it makes sense to you. And the story goes something along the lines of, after World War II, America decided to throw off tradition, particularly our European roots, and say, we're going to build the modern era. So in architecture, you see modern architecture, which is heavily influenced, I would argue, by communism and brutalism and all those things. But it's also this space age. Right, we call it mid-century now, that technology is going to solve the world's problems in ways that tradition failed. And they had some good reason to reject tradition because European wars had killed millions and millions of people, and maybe Europe doesn't have the answers, right? And that was the question after 2 world wars and atrocities without end. Okay, so this promise of the future also created the sense that, well, we can throw off family structures and God's commands and traditions that are built in how God made the world to be. And even science was moving away and rejecting a biblical view and saying, no, evolution, we're going to evolve as a society the way that we say that animals have evolved from the beginning. So the whole narrative of what makes society and what it can be had shifted. Combine that with a bunch of fathers coming back from war and being broken and being told, don't talk about it. My grandpa was one of those. His ship was sunk. His friends died at Pearl Harbor. And until his 80s, he didn't say a thing about it. But he was abusive. He was bitter. He was racist. He was hard-hearted, all through my mom and my aunts and uncles' childhood, as an expression of this brokenness that he experienced, right? Killing people with his bare hands. So you have tyrannical fathers, you have a rejection of tradition, and now you have rebellion as the heartbeat of America, rock and roll, etc. Okay? Then you have the story told to these women whose husbands are dysfunctional, whose fathers are dysfunctional. You would need to gain economic power, right, or buying power as a means of personal power. Mm-hmm. And so moms were told being a mom isn't important. You could be in a corporate job, even though moms are irreplaceable in the lives of children, and there's no corporate job that wouldn't replace you in 2 weeks or less, right? So these moms were told the lie that they were oppressed, that they were held down by the same tradition that was being rejected. And now you're going to pursue money, and America became about money. And we had this economic boom, not only because the economies of the world were war-torn and destroyed, and America was kept, right? None of our factories were bombed in the war. And so we were able to gain this global dominance after World War II. We had then all these households gaining a second income because the moms were going to work. We had a technological increase of household chores were easier because of electrical appliances were becoming commonplace, and you had birth control, so fewer children to take care of. So the mom role was like diminished and then exported out of the home to take on a masculine flavor. All right, so then you set that groundwork, and what happens to the economy is anything that you could buy that would be shared by the 2 incomes, right? So men are going to buy clothes, women are going to buy clothes, married or unmarried, it's the same. Mostly men are going to have a car, women are going to have a car, right? Even if only one works. But houses are a shared income. Mm-hmm. So the housing prices can go significantly higher compared to your total past income to, median income to whatever. Because now you have all these dual income purchasers. Houses get bigger and more comfortable. Cars do too, right? The mom SUV, first the minivan, then the SUV, it just gets bigger and more comfortable. And the result, though, is people who, because of that rejection of tradition, are now saying marriage and kids are not what I want. I'm going to find my fulfillment by moving to the city and getting a corporate job and, having avocado toast and brunch every Sunday. Those people can't access housing because housing is 2 income.
It's 2 income.
And cars are mostly 2 income now too, right? And it's consumer debt, and it's pushing away from any solution, right? Yeah. And so what I see and here in Oregon, because the West Coast is a very inflated real estate market, is I see couples who say we want to have 1 income, we want to live a traditional life. They're leaving Oregon. Mm-hmm. They're going back east, and they're not going to the East Coast. They're going to the middle, where it's still possible to live a traditional life.
Potentially afford a house.
Yeah, that's right. Now you combine that then with COVID taking huge amounts of assets, transferring them from small businesses into major corporations. Mm-hmm. So the major corporations have already backed this narrative to women because now they've got more purchasing power. So corporations are going to make more money, right? Walmart's going to save you money. Come on down. We'll make your life easy, they say to the moms. And then the government gets more taxes. So they're going to support it too. They're going to support the dual income family and the diminishing of motherhood. Okay, so now you've got this big power-centered interest also pushing the same thing. And it all comes, I would say, from back to that brokenhearted rejection, not just of tradition, but a rejection of honoring your father and mother. I think when America said, we're going to take money over God's design for marriage and family and homes and raising children, not by strangers, but by people who love them and care for them. When we rejected God's design, we set ourselves on a road to destruction. And the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, is the commandment with a promise that it will go well for you and you will live long in the land.
In the land.
And what's happening now is it's not going well for us.
You also can't usually stay even on a nationwide level. Yes, we can't live in the land long term, but also
you can't buy land.
You can't buy land, and you can't live in that town in particular that your parents are in. You know, like there's even that, like you need to leave to go find somewhere else, or yeah.
And so 25, 30-year-olds for the first time are more likely to still be living at home unmarried with no children than they are to not in America today.
25 to 30-year-olds?
Yeah.
They're more likely to live at home.
More than half of them are still at home without kids. Having never been married.
With their parents?
Yep.
More than half of 25 or 30-year-olds?
I think it's 25-year-olds. More than half now are
25-year-olds.
Yeah. But most 30-year-olds are not married, or if they are, they don't have kids. Like the numbers and the kids being born are majority of U.S. children are being born out of wedlock. So the family destruction is pivotal.
I would agree with that analysis. I think it's largely true because I think what ends up happening is then you end up having like kind of that supply and demand issue where, well, you know, you can charge more, you can start to bring those rates up to meet that two income demand, and now you're right. It's incredibly difficult. One question I've always had is like how do you then combat that? Like how do you then what do you teach and what do you culturally? Are there ways? So let's say you're 25 and you're unmarried and it's not by your choice,
right? And
you are Christian and you are working.
Yeah.
Like what's the teaching around that, or what's the teaching around like a couple who, because like we're also in a society that's probably the most uncomfortable with multi-generational houses. Than most societies, which doesn't necessarily come from the Bible. I mean, I think there is some of that. There is to leave your father and mother, cleave to each other, but that didn't mean that there wasn't any multicultural, like multi-generational houses in the Bible.
Right. But you get your own part of it.
But you get your own part of the house.
Yeah.
Exactly. You get your own part of the house or part of the property.
And what's
part
interesting,
of the things,
there is a sex distinction in that statement. It is not emphasized that the daughter, or the woman, leave her family, but it is that the man.
Yeah,
because interesting. I don't know if you've encountered the mother-in-law dynamic with your own mother compared to your wife.
Yes,
that's much more significant than your wife's mother compared to your wife.
So you'd be postulating, right, that if you were to be in a multi-generational situation for a temporary situation, it'd be wiser to be closer to her family than the man's family.
I think that's generally going to be true because when your wife have kids, she wants to move close to mom and sisters and family, not your family and your mom.
Right.
I mean, they're great too. You know what I'm saying? But that's not the impulse. And so I think there's a natural tendency there as well.
Yeah.
But yes, I would agree.
Like generally
speaking.
And
if you are, if you do move in, like if some catastrophe were to cause me to move in with my parents, I would work incredibly hard. One, to get out as quickly as possible, but two, to create my own space.
Right.
To say, I'm not in my mother's home.
Right.
And really, it would be, my wife is not in my mother's home.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because she prioritizes the home more than I do. Yeah.
That's interesting. No, it's I do think that it's just as terrible. I mean, I think that's combined, and then also the last few years, there's been things that make it worse. Like I think you have all these corporations that are just buying up all these houses and all these lands. Now I think there's also I also think that probably the whole time there was a purposeful scheme to make it impossible to own a house.
Yeah.
Because owning a house is one of the most, like that's such a key to building wealth, to building things that are your own, to building your own sense of identity.
Yep.
And I don't think that global interests or, big business or whatever wants that.
For those who don't know, there are like BlackRock, these major hedge funds are funding the purchase of single family homes in a way that force more of the total housing market to become rentals.
Yeah.
and inflate the price of houses out of reach of even a 2-income house.
I don't know if you remember, I think it was like the end of 2 years. I remember when we were trying to buy a house 2 years ago, and it was just so common to get cash offers. Like everyone would be like, oh no, there was another cash offer that came in.
Yeah.
Another cash offer. We sold to a cash offer. All those, vast majority of the cash offers were from corporations buying up.
Oh, really?
A lot of them were probably funneled through
selling their first house and now having the.
So there was some of that, but there was absolutely at the same time corporations, and they're not necessarily direct. Oh, that was BlackRock, but one of their organizations buying things up. So
part of that is the corporations have bought the same mythology around housing in America that it will never go down.
Yeah.
Right? That it's going to go up forever. And it's like, well, it can't go up forever.
I think it's RFK who is the only candidate who wants to make it like illegal or
for
basically illegal or highly penalize corporations for purchasing homes.
Well, I have relatives who work in the housing and construction, and they say the only construction going on around here is apartment complexes. And I drive around, I see the same thing. Yeah,
I see the same thing.
You will own nothing and be happy. Are you excited for the?
I'm excited for the brave, new world.
Oof. Okay.
I might have to go.
We're at time. So we were going to talk some reflections on pride and architecture and
Werry's
controversial Werry's Law. We'll save it for next time. But hey, you've been listening to On Second Thought with today, David and Luke. And if you enjoyed this
I disagree
episode,
with part of Werry's Law, I'll say that.
Oh yeah, we'll get to it. It'll be a debate. I love to kick up a little bit in these, because if we don't disagree,
I know.
What's the point? Do you know what I mean?
I know. We've been agreeing a lot this.
I know. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, or if you found something to reconsider, share it with a friend. Start a good conversation, and remember, dig a little deeper, and think again. We'll see you next time.
Cool.